Good morning, Vikings fans. This is Morning Joe's, brought to you by Ticket Club. If you're looking for tickets to the Vikings, Twins, Wild Wolves, games, concerts, even plays, and you're sick of paying 20% per ticket for a quote-unquote convenience fee, check out Ticket Club. Actually, check out our site. Click on the banner for Ticket Club and enter the discount code SKOLPTSD, all one word. I'm Joe Johnson, owner of PurplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com, PurpleTerritoryRadio.com, and the brand spanking new Vikes social media platform, which is...
Oh my God, I can't keep up.
It's too much. I just started installing all this really cool fantasy football software, so people can check their scores and see all the breaking news, and I'm like, man, they're giving ESPN a run for their money. But yeah, Vikes is like Zeitgeist, but for the Vikings, which is super nerdy. But if you go to Purple PTSD, you'll see a bunch of different new features, like a message board, chat room, kind of like a Twitter for the Vikings only. It's really cool. So check that out too. But I am here with, as always, Mr. Joe Oberly.
That's me.
How you doing, man?
Good. Did you say wolves earlier? You did say wolves.
Yeah, wolves.
As a former member of the Timberwolves staff, we always hated when people called them wolves. They're wolves. I know.
Are you? I wasn't sure if you meant like Timberwolves or if I said wolves as in like WUV.
Yes, that's what it sounded like. I'm just giving you grief because,
full disclosure, I was just telling my girlfriend 20 minutes ago a story she hadn't heard yet because I'm trying to hide as much of my past as possible through state law. But when I was 4 years old, I fell off of my bunk bed that I had with my sister, and I bit my tongue in half.
Oh, man.
And my mom came into the room, and I just remember she was like, calm down, it's fine, open your mouth. And their face just turned white as a ghost, and she said, keep your mouth closed and never open it again. So I ended up at the hospital getting 35 stitches on and inside my tongue, which at 4 years old is not very fun.
You should not have a platform this big if you're trying to hide things from your girlfriend. So.
I know. Well, luckily I'm Joe Johnson, so it's easier to hide. There's many of us running around.
There you go.
I thought you were going to say you shouldn't have a platform this big with a speech impediment, which is also true. What'd you think of the game?
Yeah, the Vikings, let's see, they played, I can't even remember, they played Seattle. I was lukewarm on it. I don't know if you read my game wrap-up after, but there's some good things and bad things like in every preseason game. I thought, the offense had a couple series, and they only put up 3 points, and they looked okay. They didn't look terrible. I'm trying to recall here. The defense I was a little disappointed in because that's they did the bend don't break again, and I know they're going against Russell Wilson, but they gave up some big plays that I didn't like to see, and I kind of agreed with Zimmer that I think they're still not where he wants them to be. You saw some great pass and catch by Cousins, guys like Thielen.
Yeah.
And Thielen is just amazing. And then he misses the touch pass on the screenplay to McAllister, which would have been a big play. That was a little disappointing. I'm sorry, who did I say?
McAllister.
Yeah. Alexander Madison, and I think it would have gone quite a ways. And
that would have been huge.
That's going to be a big part of their offense this year, so you want him to get that honed in real quick.
Well, okay, so here's my feeling. Sometimes it's easy to give national writers grief when they touch on the Vikings because it's impossible for them to kind of have their finger on the pulse of 32 teams on a level that would require some sort of Rain Man abilities. But I'm getting kind of a weird feeling of just on a local level of reading things like people talking about how great the offensive line looks and in the stat that they haven't given up a sack in 2 games in the 2 preseason games. And I look back at, that screen I'm assuming was like an all-out blitz. So that I can look at that and say Brian O'Neill wasn't in, but there was a lot of pressure coming from the right side, which is why I think Cousins kind of floated that ball or didn't get it in there very well. But there were the offensive line does not look as good as people are just on that statistic alone. Like Cousins was running for his life a few times. Some of that was a designed rollout, but there were plays. There was one where he was like 20 yards deep and he had to throw it away on the first or second drive. That was a little bit concerning. I remember what's his face Ford, the defensive tackle for the Seahawks. At one point, someone in the live chat mentioned that he had been in the backfield on every play of the drive, and he was really owning the interior up. Even when they got up to the nearly 1 yard line, then they were penalized or whatever. So it felt like there weren't sacks, but that's not the full story. I think there was a lot more pressure than people are giving.
I don't think the offensive line had a great day. I know PFF graded them out okay with pass protection, but not very good at all with run blocking. And Madison he struggled to get free. With the first going against first defense, it wasn't until the second teamers got in there that he started finding some daylight somewhere and making some plays and then Mike Boone later. But so I was definitely disappointed in the. Not disappointed. I still think they're trying to feel each other out. As you mentioned, Brian O'Neill's not in there. I know that Pat Elflein had a subpar game, and he's playing in position. And you got a rookie center who's still trying to figure out what he's got to be doing for his entire job in this league. He's a beast, and he makes some gnarly plays. I think he's going to be tough in there, but it's still going to take him a while to get everything going. And they did have a fumble. Because bad.
Yeah, I was worried a little bit too. I joked about this in the live chat about that fumble, which was on the exchange. There was a point actually multiple points in the preseason or in training camp and OTAs where Cousins has mentioned that Bradbury sweats a lot and that he's giving him crap for it. I don't think he means it 100% that he's actually concerned about it, but he said that Bradbury has said that he doesn't sweat during games, but that Cousins is worried about getting a dry ball and how that's going to affect the exchange. And so that was the first thing that popped in my head when that fumble happened. Was like, oh god.
Well, what the heck does he do with his the ball before he snaps it? Rub it against his thighs? I mean, what are we talking about?
It's just like a waterfall of disgusting.
Holy buckets! That is some major swamp butt if that's the case.
Yeah, there has to be a spray. We could market that. That would go over well.
Maybe you need some hands.
Poise pads. That would be the most Vikings thing ever if they lost the Super Bowl on a botched snap because of ass sweat. That would just be the pinnacle of this entire experiment that is.
How many times have we said that would be the most Vikings thing ever? I mean that's cliche now because there's so many things that have already been the most Vikings things ever. Just another season, another most Vikings thing that ever happened. So
they get worse every time.
I know, it's amazing.
But you mentioned the Elflein thing, and I was a huge proponent of him moving to guard. He said that he was more comfortable there. I'm an Elflein fan. I think he had a down year last year because he was coming back from injury and also playing next to the two worst guards in the NFL. But I'm a little worried about that transition. And the play that sticks out to me was a positive for Madison in that, and Bradbury. It was right before they went for it on fourth down with C.J. Ham. And they gave it to Madison up the left side, and Elflein just got completely just like ankle breaking, like right around him. And Madison was fighting for the first down, and then Bradbury kind of turned back around and tried to help him push forward. But there was a lot of stuff like that. He just didn't have a good game.
I'm not worried about him yet. He'll get there, Joe. It's early. It's the second preseason game. It's actually 3 series. I mean,
yeah.
And that's what I keep saying about the offense and everything, or the first team and everything else. They've played 3 series. So, you can't draw a whole lot of conclusions from these games yet. You can maybe draw a little bit more this weekend when they play, a whole half and maybe come out in the second half. But it's just not enough. There's not enough to look at, and they aren't. If it's in the context of a whole game, that play would be bad. But that does, But when it's in the context of two series, it's magnified as, oh my God, we should worry about this. Well, no, I don't think we should yet. So.
Yeah, and there's some good news coming out this week, or so far this week, that Sean Borman, the managing editor of Vikings Territory, reported on. Linval Joseph is cleared for. I forget what the terminology was. I have it written down, but he's on his way back.
He practiced yesterday. Yeah.
And Brian, he's cleared for contact. That's what it is. Brian O'Neill was spotted rehabbing on the sideline. He had a helmet on, but no pads. But he looks like he'll be ready for the opener from all reports that I've seen. So that's good. I do like. There's been some people talking about how with Joseph out and Stefan out, it's kind of highlighted a weakness, which is interior defensive line depth. But that gives guys like Jalen Holmes, Jaleel Johnson, Hercules Mataafa more time. I think Jaleel Johnson especially, I had really high hopes for him. This is where I would play the Big Ten horn we were talking about last week. Coming out of Iowa. I know that there's been some debate internally from some of our writers about whether or not he is a true 3 tech. You could almost argue the same thing for Mataafa, who's undersized. But from everything I've heard, has had a really astounding offseason. He was, I think I said this 2 weeks ago, when in college he was one of 2 guys his senior year, maybe it was his junior year, that graded on like a PFF level above an 85 in terms of his pass rush and his defense against the run or the rush. So he's good. He's just undersized, and I think that's kind of the knock against Jaleel Johnson as well. So it's good to see those guys. It's good to see them, I guess, with guys like Danielle Hunter out there, or
you mentioned you mentioned Linval Joseph, and I had kind of gone back and forth with Ian on the chat during the game that I was concerned about the depth on the defensive line, and he didn't necessarily agree with me. And it's because it's always been a strength, but with Linval Joseph out and these guys out, it is a little bit different. It is a little bit affected. And it was really good to see Joseph back. He did say that he played hurt last season, and when he said last year, Danielle Hunter in week 5 hit his leg, and he said he wasn't the same the rest of the year, and so he says he's feeling stronger than he had all last year, and so that's a great sign if that's the case, and he can stay healthy this year, because he's the centerpiece of that defensive line, and everything revolves around him. He makes those 2 ends even better, and so get him back, and I'll feel a little bit more comfortable about the depth on the defensive line.
And maybe Ian had an ulterior motive, since he kept floating the idea of the Vikings picking up every available wide receiver known to man during the chat, which was kind of funny. And you guys did actually talk about that a little bit in the chat, that you weren't really concerned with wide receiver depth, and I think his argument was that if Diggs and Thielen get hurt, they're screwed, but you could say that about any team, really. If your superstars get hurt, they're screwed. I think they're a lot better in that regard than they've been the last couple seasons. I like, we haven't seen a whole lot from Chad Beebe. I think he had 1 catch for 7 yards.
And then there was the interception play. I'm curious to hear what you think about that, because that pick 6 by I can't remember who the guy was on Seattle Seahawks, but it looked like either Beebe didn't finish the route, or was some miscommunication, or Sean Mannion, the quarterback, panicked with the rush coming around him and threw it out too quickly, and it was behind him, and this guy just had an easy long pick six, when the Vikings were moving down into the red zone. So initially I agreed with Ian, and I thought that it was on Mannion, that he was feeling the rush, and he threw a little bit too soon, and Beebe, who's supposed to be this incredible route runner, precision route runner a la Adam Thielen, I gave him the benefit of the doubt and thought,
I did too.
On man, but I've heard talk come out since then that maybe it was on some of the places covering this team that they couldn't say for sure, but they thought it was on Beebe running the wrong route. Or there was a miscommunication. He cut off his route before he should have and didn't follow it all the way out.
I think that had he, assuming he ran the wrong route, had he run the right route, I think it was still too early for him. I mean, if the route was supposed to be where the ball ended up, then he would have never had gotten there in the first place. I don't think. The eye test, I thought that was on Mannion, the entire time. That was a devastating blow to his chances of being the backup quarterback, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, there's people who analyze plays that I respect, that they can do that better than I can, or in a way that I can't, or I don't have access to. And most of those people basically said that it was Beebe's fault, which is extremely surprising considering what you just said about all this talk about his route running, so on and so forth. But I do think the ball, there was two levels of pressure, or two guys right behind Mannion. He's not the most mobile guy. He's had to run a little bit, and I think he threw it too soon anyway. But I think Beebe stopped short.
Yeah.
Which, again, is surprising and I don't want to say disconcerting. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about the wide receiver position and the fact that Beebe's basically the third guy and who's going to be the fourth and fifth. So I'm not going to just chalk it up to that. But considering we haven't seen a whole lot from Beebe, that was not, like you said, especially with the limited sample size, stuff like that does stick out. Right.
He's back there receiving punts anyway, so we've seen him doing that. I think he's got that job sewed up, I believe.
Well, it's better than B.C. Johnson having it. It'd be dead by the bye week. That lack of a fair catch, I don't know how he held onto that ball, but that was vicious. And speaking of vicious stuff, there's two plays in the last 2 weeks that I want your take on too. Obviously, the Holton Hill thing, a lot of people were saying in the live chat, is he trying to get cut? Now, the thing is that those things happen in a split second, and I think it was more, and Zimmer touched on this in the post game. He said it was an illegal hit. It was helmet to helmet, but also he was like, this isn't the best example, but if these guys are going to run these RPOs, then they should be treated as runners, and we have to be able to hit them, is what he said. Not even that we need to hit them, it was that we have to be able to. Which I agree with a little bit, but I think, some people were saying it was Lynch's kind of his fault for going into the slide. I don't think Holton Hill said, I'm just going to rip this guy's head off because I'm upset about my suspension. I think he just went for the tackle and it just lined up that way, and that's kind of inevitable in regards to how football, you can't make this 100% safe.
No, my take on that is I think that was, said facetiously in the chat, is he trying to get cut here? Because I don't think Holton Hill wants to go anywhere. He's got a team that is sticking with him despite, 2 suspensions that have caused him to miss the first 8 games of the year. The fact that he isn't gone already, it's quite amazing in some regards. So they must see a lot in him. They must want him around. So if he wants to get cut from here, then he's not a deep thinker, I guess. He's not very smart. So I don't think that's the case, though.
I don't think it was intentional.
He was trying to light the guy up because the guy was not down. He's trying, or I shouldn't say light him up, but hit him hard, and that's what you're supposed to do. You got to be able to get the ball carrier down. And Lynch went down at the last second and lowered his head into the zone. Hill's already committed, but I don't know. It's one of those bang. It's the hardest thing to legislate in this game with these rules, because sometimes you have to start tackling a guy where you think you're going to get him, and if the guy makes a move that puts his head in the danger zone, well, that's part of it. I'm not going to blame. I'm saying that's not his fault. You got to I guess you got to tackle less aggressively, and I'm sure all these players are coached to do that, and they're doing it to some certain extent, but it is not a perfect science. You can just to shut that down. So I don't think it was intentional. Did he want to hit him? Good. Yes, he's a quarterback. Does he want to hit somebody? Because yes, he's going to be out for 8 games. But buddy, you don't want to get yourself ejected either. So he may have to adjust his way of doing things a little bit.
Zimmer mentioned he led with his head, and I know they teach them to lead more with their shoulders. But it's just like you said, you can't 100% legislate these things. You can't. No one has that level of body control either. And when it comes to a split-second decision and whether you're gonna take it easy on a guy who might end up scoring a touchdown, a lot of the guys are going to default to the latter. Then you have the Treadwell fine, which was relatively hefty. It was almost $30,000 for the block that he had against the Saints. And overwhelmingly, the response that I saw on Twitter anyway was that football as we know it is basically dead and blah, blah, blah. Now, I think their intentions are good. They don't want these guys, I wouldn't even really feel good about covering a sport where there's this laissez-faire attitude towards brain trauma, which has been the case up until they've really been forced to do something about it. But I don't think, watching that replay, I can see maybe why the refs flagged it the way they did. But with the league having, a week and a half to look at it, I was surprised that he was fined in the first place, and also that it was so much. Just because all the criteria for it being what they said it was, I don't think was really met. He didn't lead with his head. He hit the guy in the torso. The guy, he didn't hit him in the back. He hit him up front, like as he was turning.
Who's this now?
The Treadwell block on the the punt return, maybe it was a kick return, but they called it. I don't know if it was a illegal block in the back, but it wasn't really a block in the back. The guy was just turning, so I could see in a split second as a ref saying, "Okay, 15-yard flag," but for the league to look at it in slow motion and see what they saw, I don't agree with it. Personally, I get why they're doing it, and I know people aren't happy with. I think I joked, and I didn't mean this. I didn't really mean it, but I said like the slow, inevitable march towards flag football has begun. And I don't mean that, and I know they want to keep these guys healthy, especially in the preseason, but I don't think that was a bad hit.
Yeah, that one's kind of slipped my mind. It's not as fresh in my mind as the Holton Hill hit, so I can't comment on it.
Yeah, it's on the message board. Sean responded to the guy that released the information about it.
That's fine.
The national guy, and you'll see the video if people want to go and see the video in slow motion. It's in the message board.
Whatever. I know. I guess maybe this is just the boring defend the NFL take. I mean, yeah, they want to clean this stuff up. Yeah, they got to try some things out in preseason, make some calls, and see where they're at and see where they land. Yeah, the refs are in preseason mode too, so all those things. But so it's too bad. It might have been the wrong call. Plane, Joe?
Am I by a plane?
Are you leaving? Okay.
Yeah, I've decided to become a Kansas City Chiefs fan.
So anyway, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's not a major thing. It's tough for Treadwell because he may be out of a job soon, but he needs that money. I don't know.
I felt the same way too. And we'll touch on Treadwell's day. I like the analogy that Luke Braun, who we used to do a show with, had, which I'll share in a second. But since we're talking about rules in the NFL, one of the new rule changes that a lot of people mentioned during the game was the ability to challenge on pass interference calls. And there was the 34-yard catch from Cousins to Thielen, and it was clearly a catch. And they challenged it. Pete Carroll challenged it, basically, I think they're testing the waters on this new rule, but he challenged the catch, but once you do that, they can look at whether or not Thielen pushed off. And so there were a lot of people saying that this is not what the rule was passed for, and when they passed it, they said coaches wouldn't arbitrarily throw challenge flags for whether or not a guy had possession in the hopes that they could get a pass interference call. Now, I don't really understand why they couldn't just challenge for the pass interference as opposed to doing it that way, unless it's a secondary thing that needs to be looked at and they can't just challenge the pass interference, which is how I understood it. But a lot of people have been complaining about that. I've always been the type of person to think that this is why I was against moving the extra point back 5 yards, and I know we debated this with coincidentally Luke, and you and Luke were on the side of the rule change because you thought it would become so automatic that it wasn't interesting. And my thought is always, if there's an extra way for the Vikings to screw up, they're going to find a way to do that in a very important situation.
Purple PTSD.
Totally, the site, the URL every year, a little bit, I worry that we might have to change it, and every year it just gets stronger. But I'm for that rule change, I think, especially when you have two receivers on the level that the Vikings do, that it's something that clearly can change a lot of things. A game can't end on a defensive penalty, for example, so on and so forth, and they did call a pass interference on the Seahawks, I think on was it the following play that they just went right back to Thielen? I don't know, but I'm for it, is my point.
You're for them being able to look at an potential out of bounds play, a potential catch, and then actually see if there's pass interference on it.
Yeah, I do worry though that it slows the game down to the point of Major League Baseball.
So is that the actual rule that they can do that? I mean, they're going to look at everything once they open it up, and if they happen to see something else, they're going to call it.
I guess. I mean, that's the interpretation that they made it seem on TV. I didn't understand that that's how it worked, but that's how everyone was reacting to it. And you would think that, a lot of the time you hear like, well, that's not what the challenge is about. They can't call that. And I think that's what it was part of, a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's interesting because they've always demanded that they claim what they're challenging.
Yes.
And so I don't know if that it's news to me if that's changed. If that's the case, that's fortuitous, but then they're all going to throw their flags and kind of shoot their wad right away because there's all kinds of things to challenge on every pass play, it seems like. So
well, the guy that they kept bringing into the booth, the guy that explained the rules, he had said there had been 31 situations in the preseason to that point, Sunday night. So 2 games, with the exception of Monday night. 31 times the coaches had thrown it, and it was overturned 6 times where they found pass interference, which meant that the refs were adhering to it pretty strictly. But it also showed that these coaches are really trying to, I think, feel out the waters on how that's going to be implemented.
Oh, yeah, they're throwing long passes just with that in mind. It seems like, the Vikings are going downfield a heck of a lot more than they usually do, and which was fun to see. And it worked to their favor. The pass interference call against the pass to Adam Thielen was huge set up the Vikings' first score anyway. So
yeah, and I'm writing I posted on Vikings territory today I'm doing like a fantasy breakdown by position, top 10 receivers. I did my top 5 because I'm very wordy if people haven't picked up on that by now. And after especially seeing the game on Sunday night, I have Thielen a lot higher than most. I bought a bunch of those magazines, and a lot of them have him at like 11, 12, 13, and Diggs directly after that. But seeing the continued chemistry between him and Cousins, I feel like he's just going to have a monster. They're in mid-season form. They seem to just be running that same play. They got 34 yards both times in the pass interference call, which is almost the exact same play call.
That's what they're going to do in the preseason, Joe. If something works, they'll go back to it so you don't have to show too much of your...
Yeah.
So...
But we talked about this ad nauseum, but he catches everything you throw his way, so it's just... the idea that Diggs is this down the field threat, which he totally is, and that the defense is schemed to take him out of it, I can understand that because he's faster and so on and so forth. But God, Thielen's just a beast.
Turn on your tape recorders or your reasonable facsimile for a DVR on the podcast for this next bit. I think Adam Thielen's pretty good
At football?
Yeah,
Ooh.
that's football.
That's a spicy take.
It
I
is.
know. I was going to say that's literally I just wrote Thielen is a beast in the notes. That's some really professional analysis.
It's true, though. I mean, the guy works at getting better every year, and that's that's how you become at this level. I mean, yeah, we're going to hear the stories for the rest of his life about, like we say about John Randall, undrafted, blah,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah,
Tom
blah,
Brady.
blah. He comes to this level, and it's warranted, but it happens because of the work he puts in. He did that, he was a hard worker. Zimmer was saying that when he was first brought in as a walk-on, how hard he worked, so he kept him around, And if you got somebody that's works that hard at their craft and studies it and tries to get better, they're going to. I mean, that's how. This is not that I'm comparing him to Michael Jordan, but that's what people like Jordan and Larry Bird and all got better. They had God-given gifts, but they also worked their butt off.
Randy Moss too.
He's another one. You're
a
right.
reputation for that, and I think he was lucky to end up with Chris Carter because I think Carter really put a lot of that into him. But a lot of guys say because they know it sounds good each offseason, like I'm always trying to get better, but that doesn't necessarily get to the level of almost being pathological like it is with a guy like Jordan, for example. His competitive streak is legendary. And Thielen, when you hear about what he's trying to improve on, it seems genuine, and you can actually see him doing it if you have access to it.
Joe, do you think Thielen is going to benefit again this year from Diggs getting more double coverage? I mean, I think that's happened in the past, and maybe that's why some of these national outlets have Diggs ranked behind him. You know?
That's what I'm totally seeing people putting them like 1A and 1AB, but or like 13, 14. You would think not. I mean, during the record-breaking streak to start the season last year, I kept wondering when the defensive coordinators were going to stop doing that, and I don't necessarily think they did. As the season progressed, I just think the line got to the point where they just couldn't do a lot of that stuff anymore. But I was originally concerned from a fantasy angle that because Thielen is more nationally famous at this point, for a good reason. I mean, just like his reputation in the league has grown too, that he might get more of the lion's shares of the coverage. But I just think that beyond that, like we saw week 1, that pass where he was double covered on that play against the Saints. Mm-hmm. It's just that Cousins threw it into a good window, but it was not a perfect throw either. Thielen kind of had to do like he did to start the season last year, like to turn around while you're running full speed one way and fall kind of backwards to get it. I think that his catch radius makes him, double covered or not, really hard to defend against. And there were times last year where they were both double covered, and I know that's why they want Cousins to scramble more because he can pick up first downs with his legs, so on and so forth. But I don't know if it'll matter much.
I don't know. It sure concerns me because your Thielen love is almost like you think he played for a Big Ten team. So I know.
Well, I mean, Minnesota State. I'll give it some at least Midwest love. But what was interesting too about the wide receivers was that Irv Smith Jr. was lining up and running a lot of wide receiver routes, and coincidentally, his father followed one of our Twitter accounts.
Nice.
Yeah, it was really cool, and I messaged him and I said he should follow these other ones if he wants to get local coverage and listen, because it was one of the podcast arms that he subscribed to. And he said, I just did. And then we chatted a little bit, exchanging pleasantries. And then I asked him a question about that. and I was like, I'm not sure if you can really say anything, but with him lining up as a wide receiver, is that something that you foresee But that was this morning, so I was hoping to hear before the show, which is kind of anticlimactic. But I thought that was interesting how they have been lining him up, and that might explain some of the quote-unquote 2 tight end sets, which could end up being more like bunches.
Well, that's what I had mentioned. Sorry to interrupt, but a couple of weeks ago I mentioned when I asked Mark Craig from the Star Tribune about who the wide receiver 3 is going to be, and he says Irv Smith Jr. So
yeah.
That it's they're going to be very creative, I think, in the way they use him. Again, he's got to get it all figured out because he's going to be doing a lot of different things. But boy, it's exciting to see, as you're saying, the 2 tight end sets and him lining up as wide receiver, and he'll be in the slot for sure. And who knows? It should be fun.
He had his first touchdown. I thought it was adorable that he put on this great move, and there was literally nobody there to defend him. He could have just walked. But there was some stories about him this week too that came out, just with the team being surprised by how good of a blocker he is. And I've wondered on the show and in a couple articles, just looking at Kubiak's history with the teams he's been on, namely Denver and Baltimore, not so much Houston, where he preferred tight end that could block to a tight end that was primarily a pass catcher, and those blocking tight ends ended up getting the lion's share of the receptions because of that. And it made me wonder, how Rudolph's going to fit into things. This was really more so during the will they, won't they extend him conversation. So I thought they might let him walk for that reason, which they didn't. But it'll be interesting to see as the season progresses how that goes. But based on what we've seen, I don't think it's really going to end up going that way.
We had some discussion on the live chat too, going back and forth, and I'm not casting aspersions one way or the other, but what are your thoughts on David Morgan? I mean, I struggled really hard to get back on the field, but there were people saying that they didn't think he was. And I just don't see that happening. And I'm not going to say what should happen, but I always like to project what I think the team will do, rather than tell them what I think they should do. But so I'm saying I just don't think they will. I know they absolutely love the skills this guy has and what he can bring to the team, and it is different than both Rudolph and Conklin and Irv Smith. I mean, they all may be decent blockers, but they're not as good a blocker as David Morgan. And David Morgan always comes through when called upon to catch a pass and for a first down or on a third down or something. So I could see them maybe putting him on the PUP list or maybe PUP list to return or something like that if he can't get back from this injury. But I just can't see them letting him go. He's still too valuable and too young.
No, yeah, totally. I mean, I completely agree with you. He's not the most graceful guy when they do throw him the ball. He reminds me a little bit of Kleinsasser, even though their body types are completely different. But yeah, no, there's no one else on the team that fits that role. At the position, that is a premier blocker like he is. I think they put a lot of value on that.
Yeah, and with Kubiak on the team, I think they value more tight ends than less. Now, granted, they're starting. They of course love Irv Smith, and they've got Kyle Rudolph, and certainly if you're preparing to let Rudolph go at the end, you want to keep your better tight ends around. So totally. I'm not saying they are, but he doesn't have a guaranteed contract after this year. So who knows what's going to happen.
I understand why he did it, maybe psychologically or just for the fan base, but I did think it was interesting how Rudolph announced it, just because it made it seem like he was going to be here for the next 5 years when the team really has no financial hit if they get rid of him after this year. I think that, things could change, but why would they let Morgan walk with the potential of Rudolph being gone at the end of the season, and then they have him and Conklin, or they have to draft somebody else? I don't think they're going to do that.
Right. I wish we knew what was going on with David Morgan. It's kind of a mystery, and there's not been a lot said about it. So I guess bottom line is I hope they don't, because I think he's a valuable player, and the team certainly feels so.
What did you? In regards to the running backs, I'm trying to think of how to pose this question. I think you hit the nail on the head in regards to Madison and his numbers looking better than how the day started, for sure. I've heard Deshaun Vaughn wrote an article about seventh round pick Oli Udoh and how good he's been playing. Granted, it's against the threes, but it does seem like, especially when Mike Boone has been in the game, that they're opening a lot more holes, which is encouraging, I suppose. But there's really no way that the third running back spot isn't Boone's at this point. He's just been too reliable. He's been flashy. Granted, it's against backups, but both him. I want to look at the stats because the thing I saw was someone said Dalvin who, which is another question we'll get into. Actually, let's start with that. Cook didn't play again. They said it was because there's a new turf at US Bank Stadium.
It's just an excuse. They're just not going to put him out there.
Yeah, I mean, I said this last week, and I don't want to just turn around on it because the logic hasn't changed about, I don't think he's necessarily earned it a la AP or Favre or something. But, I understand why they're doing it. If he were to get hurt in the preseason, everyone would be like, why was he out there? But at the same time, at some point, he's going to be labeled as fragile, which he's already really leaning on one side of the fence towards that being his reputation. So I get that. I think they understand that they need him healthy for at least the vast majority of the season.
That's it. That's it right there.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to see him, but that having been said, I'm extremely confident that should he get injured, knock on wood, the combination of Madison and Boone, as much as I like Abdullah, who didn't play, he was injured. He returned to practice yesterday. They didn't really say anything about why, though. They've had 44 carries combined, Madison and Boone, 207 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 receptions for another touchdown. And their average is okay. I think they both broke at least 4 yards. I think Boone had 4.4. He had that 45-yard catch, though. That was just awesome.
Madison was 4.1.
Okay. Let's see. I have it written down, actually. I actually do some show prep.
Anyway,
to the contrary.
It's the fans that want to see Dalvin Cook. I wanted to see him. We all wanted to see him, but we're not going to see him, and it's just fine. It's fine. I mean, I bring up the name Byron Buxton. Look how that team is hurting him not being in there. He's valuable to your team, and they're going to get him back, and they're really going to. Latest I heard, they're not going to get him back to the end of August because they want to be sure to have him for the playoffs. It's kind of a similar thing here. Why play him in the preseason when it's meaningless, and have him sit the whole season on the bench? I'm not going to say he's fragile, but I'm going to say he's way important to this team, and they know that. Now I like their depth behind him. I do, personally. I think Madison and Boone are going to be just great. And, even the Blasingame is his name. I mean, that guy's fun to look at.
That's a huge debate now, too, with him or C.J. Ham.
He used to play running back before he became a fullback. So there's some versatility there that's very valuable to the team. So I really don't have a concern about the depth of the running back situation. I have concern about depth on a number of other positions, most importantly cornerbacks, but that's another story.
I was wrong, though. Boone had a 3.1 average, but he made up for it with that catch. You bring up cornerback depth, and one thing that was brought up in the live chat was there was a play in particular that I remember where Mackenzie Alexander got burnt. And I brought up, not to keep being such a stereotype of myself, but my whole
only you can.
Trey Waynes is underrated logic.
It's a good line. I've never heard that before.
I know who else but me would do that. But I don't. I guess I just on that level, but not to pose it that way. I just don't see the consistency from him for these people before the season that were saying they could trade Waynes or Rhodes, because between Hughes, who looked good, but we have such a small sample size, and we know how hard it is for young corners to acclimate to Zimmer's system, and then a guy like Mackenzie Alexander, whose contract is up next season alongside Trey Waynes's. There's just times where he looks really good, but there'll just be these, just situations where he gives up a big play still, despite his improved play.
Yeah, he did that. He did that the other night, and I think that's part of Zimmer's early frustration with him early in his career. That he didn't, he wanted to be a big flashy player, and he didn't always work well within the system, and he let some guy go right in the middle of the zone the other night, and I don't know if it's his man, if he should have passed him off as it looked like he did, and the guy caught a big pass downfield. So I'm sure he heard about that one from Zimmer, or somebody did, because it seemed like a blown coverage. And it's always been praised about him coming out in last year and now this year, as far as Mackenzie Alexander. So I think I'm a little frustrated. Maybe he's being a little lazy, and now that he's got these the Zimmer behind him, maybe he's being a little lazy in the preseason. But I hope he's now not just playing for his contract. I hope he just becomes a professional and keeps showing up every game and playing great, and just have a lights out season, because they need him to. The uncertainty of Hughes and the absence of Hill is really concerning. They got to stay healthy back there. It will start to get bad.
Yeah, it's everyone was saying Hughes would be back by the start of camp, similar to David Morgan. That hasn't happened. Word is he might start the season on the pup to return list, like you mentioned earlier. I'm getting a little worried about it. And there's part of it when what you were saying about Alexander just kind of reminds me of what, like, you mentioned this a little bit, but Zimmer's frustration with the defense and complacency and not having like the drive to get better like the offense had. And there were I remember early on in the Saints game, one of the Pete Bursich mentioned how with the way training camp is now versus how it was 10, 15 years ago, without the two-a-days, without the more physical tackling and all of that, that a lot of these guys, are using the first few preseason games to actually hit people for the first time, whereas before they'd been doing it all summer, or at least when training camp started. So, yeah, there's room for improvement. They are doing that bend don't break thing, which was more so a 2018 thing than a 2017 thing. In 2017, they had that historically good third down percentage and so on and so forth. But as a whole, I'd like to see the defense do better. Granted, like we've talked about, Linval hasn't been out there. Stefan hasn't been out there lately. So we'll see. I don't know. There's a lot of room for improvement, which I think we can talk about in a minute when we talk about things to look forward to in the Cardinals game. But the last thing I wanted to talk about in regards to what we've seen thus far, the Seahawks game, is the battle for the quarterback 2 position, and I think this is the biggest example of the difference between the thought of the team and the thought of the fan base, because a lot of people were putting up polls, who do you think has the leg up, and everyone was, putting their money on Kyle Sloter, and I saw a quote from Zimmer from this week that I thought explained things really well. When asked about Sloter, he said that basically he looks good in the game, but he needs to focus on being, I think, either a quarterback or a professional quarterback. And he said in regards to making the right checks, calling the right formation, and the best part was seeing the time clock when it's literally 8 yards ahead of his face.
I didn't see that one.
Yeah. I copy and pasted the full quote into the agenda, which tech issues made it so Joe got that at the last second, but it was really kind of saucy, which is Zimmer's been known to do from time to time. But I put it as constructive criticism in the agenda, but the more I read it, it's a little bit more just like criticism, I guess. That's
Zimmer, trying to reach the guy in practice and not getting through. Well, I think I'll try it through the media and see what he says. But boy, oh boy, that to me sounds like, I don't know if that's accurate. I'm not sure I'd want to go to have that guy as my second in command. If you want a professional out there who's going to execute the offense the way you're set it up to be, and not that you gotta be worrying about A, him making the right calls, or B, noticing the play clock. Come on, dude. So that was. A little concerning.
Yeah, and that was him, I think, when they had that delay of game. One of the agenda items I didn't really put in there, or we haven't talked about, was penalties in the red zone, which, one of them was on Kyle Rudolph for clipping, and I've heard that that's kind of one of the things that happens in the zone blocking scheme is that you get a lot of clipping calls. But, yeah, I think Sloter had that delay of game, and I think he's a gamer. I mean, but outside of that interception, which I think obviously is going to stick in people's minds, the stats for both, Mannion was 11 for 14 for 88 yards and a touchdown. Sloter was 11 for 13 for 116 yards and a touchdown. He's also playing against the threes. I saw a stat, the Vikings quarterbacks this preseason have a 76% completion rate, which is just amazing. And a touchdown to interception ratio of 5-1. Which arguably could have been on the receiver, not necessarily the quarterback, even though football doesn't really work that way, at least not wholly. So I think the level of play has been really high, and I think it'll come down to those things. And when you have an offense predicated, or a team really, that success is predicated on field position and trying to have short down to distance third downs from within the 5, Zimmer's not going to tolerate a lot of penalties. That are just things that you don't need. But I think what people are seeing is, I do think Sloter's got better timing with the receivers because he's been here longer. I think he's got a little bit more zip on the ball. But it's just his legs, too, I think, that are really helping him.
Yeah, it almost sounds like he's a poor man's Case Keenum a little bit,
Yeah.
They've got him around. I guess I was saying this last week. They've got him around for a reason. He's still here after, if they didn't like what they thought there as far as potential, they wouldn't have brought him back. They'd have tried somebody else, But they keep trying him for, keeping him around, seeing if he's going to make that next step. And that quote is a cattle prod in the ass right now to say, hey, make the next step, dude, or else we're going to move on from you. And Browning's going to be stepping in.
And what does everyone say about Sloter? The announcers, they always say he's like the MVP of the preseason every year.
Yes.
And when you have a guy that plays that well, but you still draft a guy, or bring in an undrafted guy rather in Browning, and then you go out with limited cap space and pay someone like Mannion, there's got to be something else to the story.
Well, that's that story I told last week about Tim Schmitz from St. John's, who was tried out with the Vikings and Bud Grant. He always flashed. He always had big splashes in the preseason, and he just said he just didn't work hard. Didn't get done what he needed to do in practice. Now, these are two different coaches, but Zimmer's old school like Bud Grant is, and so you never know if that's what he wants to see.
Yeah. Room for improvement in the Cardinals game, another home game. Speaking of which, if you're still looking for tickets, just go to the site. You'll see the banner for Ticket Club. The discount code is SKOL PTSD, all one word, SKOL PTSD, and you'll get a free 1-year membership on Ticket Club, which is like a $50 value. It's pretty sweet. You won't pay any fees on any tickets across the country, or North America, actually. The one, I do want to see Elfline play better, especially now that we're going to have a larger sample size, like you mentioned, the first half, probably. And cleaning up some of the penalty stuff. There's been a decent amount of flags.
Oh yeah, and that's some of it. We touched on a little bit earlier. It's the coaches testing things out, testing out the new rules, but some of it is bad penalties. Holton Hill. I'm not sure what I think of the Kyle Rudolph one. I mean that was a clipping penalty, but it seemed kind of iffy. But you can't have that. This is the time to have them. They don't worry me that bad if they continue into the season. We haven't had a lot of false start and it's kind of penalties. So I mean that's a good thing for a new line. But
totally.
Take the good with the bad, I guess there.
We didn't really touch on this because we saw some punts from the new kicker, the jack of all trades, master of none, perhaps, and Kari Vedvik. His first punt was good. He landed it at the 8-yard line on a fair catch. There was some debate as to on his kickoff. I posted on Twitter that I expected him to kick it like through the roof of the stadium, and someone mentioned that he was probably holding back a little bit just because I'm sure coaches with the new rule change, with everything starting at the 25-yard line, maybe they're forcing people to earn that 25 yards as opposed to just giving it to them, which completely makes sense. But I would like to see him get in there for so there's some debate about whether or not for longer kicks like 50, 55 yards that they're going to use him. And I would love to just see him kick a field goal in general, even though I don't think he'll end up with that job. I think he will be the punter and the kickoff specialist perhaps. But I would love to see him try a couple long field goals because he claims he's hit 70-yard field goals in practice, a la Sebastian Janikowski. So I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I was impressed by how effortless it seemed for this guy to boot into the middle of the end zone. He just it just looked like it was a walk in the park for him. And we haven't seen enough from him yet. I'm not out of practice anymore, so I'm not watching him. But I'm kind of excited. If this guy can figure it out and really become a machine back there, and he could be a decent kicker for this team for a long time, and maybe Zimmer's hair wouldn't get any more prematurely gray with his kicking situation as he moves forward with this team.
Yeah, so. It's one of those situations where I feel like he really is trying, and Zimmer is, and that it frustrates him, but it's almost like the more he focuses on it, the worse it gets.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
There have been a lot of arguments this week, or articles rather, that I think one of the headlines was just are the Vikings kicking woes Zimmer's fault? And I was reading that, something occurred to me that I just wanted to mention. It might be insane. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I was reading an article about that, and they were talking about John DeFilippo running the ball. And I know that there's relative autonomy for the offensive coordinator with the Vikings especially, or in particular. But it just was really strange to me that and I never thought of this before, but Zimmer's the head coach. He can overrule the play calls and just say run the ball. I have never heard of that dynamic before, where a head coach during the week is like, "Will you run the ball, please?" And I'll be like, "Okay," and then he doesn't do it while the head coach is just sitting there stewing. Couldn't he come in and say, "All right, you're gonna run the ball or run this play"? I mean, he's the head coach.
I said that quite a few times last year when Zimmer first started crabbing to the media about wanting the coach to run. I remember saying it on this show.
I tune you out mostly.
Okay, I just said the same thing. Isn't he the head coach? Can he say run the ball?
Yeah.
How many times? And get this team off my defense's back. Give him some rest. That's his. You would think, but I think he abrogates so much responsibility to the offensive coordinator side, that he doesn't, probably do that kind of thing. Maybe that's why he brought in Kubiak, just to say, hey, okay, here's another head coach who understands the need for running the ball and how important it is. And so I think you're going to see a lot of it, and which then begins to tell me, why would you want to wear out Dalvin Cook any earlier than you got him? But yeah, I would love to see Dalvin get some snaps this time. I don't think it's going to happen on Saturday, but
that was going to be my last question.
Yeah, I mean, just for timing's sake, you'd love to see him out there. But they get timing in practice too. But I would like to see it. But boy, I want that. I would love even more so to see him play 16 games plus. So
yeah. It's going to be interesting, and it reminds me of we're going to be doing a lot of fantasy football stuff. As I mentioned, I wrote a fantasy article. I'm trying to find the best way to make it so people that listen to the show or go to the website can do a league with us or through us. It would be through, one of the Yahoo probably, but in a way that would be, we can give out like awards and trophies and swag and talk about it on the message board. But it'll be interesting to see where Dalvin Cook goes, because there's been a lot of talk about him being the dark horse rushing champ this year, and to the point that it might even hurt Cousins and Thielen and Diggs' numbers just by committing to the run more. But we'll find out, I guess.
Good thing we don't play fantasy in preseason. That's all I can say.
That's why I always wait until the the week like the Sunday or Saturday before the first game. I know a lot of people are chomping at the bit and they do theirs super early, but yeah, you kind of want to see what's going on, especially in terms of injuries.
Oh yeah.
And it doesn't matter. I know somehow you're going to end up with Thielen, and it's going to drive me crazy.
If I can, gonna have to take him, Joe. You're gonna have to get him number 1 overall if you want him.
I'm gonna. If we were doing an auction, I would just do $200 for him just for that reason, and just get a bunch of waiver wire guys after that. But yeah, hopefully if you're listening to the show, you will stop by our new message board / social media arm. It's called Vikes. And it's pretty sweet. Just go to purpleptsd.com. There's articles about it on Vikings territory. You'll see, like, on the menu, there's a whole bunch of new fields. You can create groups like Google+. You can chat in a message board if that's your speed. If you would like live events being in the chat room, you can do that. It's essentially like Twitter and Instagram had a baby with, like, an old PHP board and a live chat function. It's pretty sweet.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. I think there's a few message boards that have been dying too that used to be well known for the Vikings, so hopefully people are looking for a place to chat about the season. But it's always hard to get those things started. It's kind of a snowball situation. But I'll be pushing it all year, dagnabbit, because I'm lonely, is my point. And usually the way that we end every show. A peek into my fragile psyche.
Nice.
But yeah, thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back next week. I'm hoping to start doing some more video stuff, definitely before the game on Sunday, and then moving forward as the season progresses. So keep an eye on that on our YouTube channel, which is Vikings Territory, or Viking Territory on Twitter / Periscope. But this has been Morning Joe's for a Wednesday, August 21st. Talk to you guys next week. Skol.